After a particularly tense encounter with my mother-in-law, where she harshly criticized my job situation and educational background, things reached a breaking point. The situation took a shocking turn when she unexpectedly threw hot water at me. This was an extreme and unwarranted action. While I was fortunate not to get hurt, the potential for serious injury was clear. I was stunned by her drastic behavior, especially since it was my husband, Daniel, who was unemployed, not me. The growing resentment I felt towards her unreasonable behavior became overwhelming. I reached my limit and decided I had no choice but to leave. "If this is what you want," I said firmly, "I have no choice but to go." To my surprise, my mother-in-law seemed almost pleased by my decision to leave, showing no remorse for her actions. Unable to handle such a toxic environment any longer, I decided to return to my parents' home. What she didn't know was that I had been the primary financial supporter of our household. I had taken up stock trading and was earning around $45,000 a month after leaving my job. Despite being pushed out, I was confident in my ability to support myself independently. My relationship with Daniel began in college. We both studied economics and dreamed of careers in finance. After we both secured jobs at different brokerage firms, Daniel proposed, and I happily accepted, looking forward to a bright future together. However, our plans changed unexpectedly when Daniel asked me to quit my job and move in with him to his mother's home. He wanted to stay with her after his father's passing, and despite my initial hesitation, I agreed, hoping it wouldn't be too burdensome. Recent events, however, made me deeply regret my decision. I vowed never to help my mother-in-law again, even if she faced financial difficulties. When Daniel was in middle school, he became his mother's only companion after his father died. As an only child, he was deeply concerned about her well-being, which I understood and respected. That's why I agreed to live with them. 3 weeks later, we moved into Daniel's family home. At first, my mother-in-law seemed happy to have her son back home, but her attitude quickly changed when it came to me. Her cold, unwelcoming gaze made it clear that she didn't approve of me. Despite feeling unwelcome, I tried to stay positive, ignoring a faint muttering from her that I couldn't quite hear. It might have been about me, but I decided to let it go. Living with her soon proved to be more difficult than I had expected. One morning, I was abruptly awakened by her loud voice demanding that I get up and make breakfast. It was only 5 a.m. "Don't just lie around because you're not working," she scolded sharply. Although it felt unreasonable at that early hour, I didn't argue and began preparing breakfast. Throughout the process, I had to endure her constant critiques about my speed and efficiency. After what felt like an eternity, breakfast was finally ready, though it had only been 25 minutes. I apologized for the delay, only to be met with more complaints about the time it took. Her next issue was with the soup, which she claimed was too salty. I honestly didn't think it was, but she insisted that my cooking was a deliberate attempt to harm her health. "What are you saying? Is there something wrong with my taste? Are you trying to kill me?" she demanded. The constant criticism and the shocking incident with the hot water were more than I could tolerate. The situation was clear. I needed to find a way to get out of this toxic environment and reclaim my peace of mind. After being accused of making the meals too salty, I was taken aback by my mother-in-law's harsh words. Confused and concerned, I finally asked, "Why are you so harsh on me?" Her response was dismissive. "What are you talking about? I don't think I'm being harsh. Are you trying to make me out to be the bad guy?" She didn't seem to understand the impact of her words on me, and I was too overwhelmed by her constant pressure to argue back. "Finish eating and start cleaning up," she commanded. "There's laundry to do, so there's no time to rest." From that moment on, every day felt like a relentless barrage of criticisms and tasks that wore me down mentally and physically. As I cleaned, she would point out missed dust in the corners. When I did the laundry, she would complain about a lingering stain. About a month into living with her, I felt like I was nearing my breaking point. I decided it was time to talk to Daniel. "It's about your mother," I began hesitantly. "She's been very critical every day, and it's becoming difficult for me. Could you please ask her to ease up?" Daniel's response was disappointing. He didn't seem to acknowledge my concern. At that moment, I was irritated, but then I noticed he looked unusually pale, as if he was burdened with something significant. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" I asked. After a pause, Daniel hesitantly admitted, "Actually, I've been fired from the company." I was stunned and couldn't immediately process his words. "Is this some kind of joke?" I asked, my voice filled with disbelief. "It's not a joke," Daniel explained. "Due to an economic downturn, the company had to downsize, and I was laid off." I was shocked by the news. "So you'll be unemployed starting tomorrow?" I asked. "Well, I can work for one more month after receiving the notice of dismissal," Daniel replied, "but after that, I'll be out of work." Fortunately, I had been using my stock trading knowledge during my time at the securities company. Although it was challenging at first, I was now earning about $45,000 a month. Financially, we weren't struggling, which was a relief. I comforted Daniel and temporarily put aside my frustrations with my mother-in-law's harassment. From the next day onward, I continued to endure her harsh treatment as Daniel lost his job. Feeling the need to support him, I persevered through the difficult situation. A month passed and Daniel officially became unemployed. Initially, he started looking for a job, but gradually, he began spending most of his time at home, making excuses. "Shouldn't you start looking for a job more seriously?" I suggested, hoping to motivate him to find a new path forward. "I'm looking, but it's tough to find a good company that fits me," Daniel responded. His voice lacked any real urgency or intent to find new work. Reluctantly, I continued to be the main provider for us. As time went on, my mother-in-law's harshness only worsened, and I felt more drained with each passing day. At first, I thought I had to put up with it because Daniel was out of work, but over time, that reasoning didn't seem justifiable anymore. My days became a blur of listlessness. One morning, in a rare occurrence, Daniel left the house early, possibly to finally start a serious job hunt. After he left, I began my usual chores, determined to make sure everything was clean and done properly. My mother-in-law was constantly nagging from her spot on the living room sofa. She sipped her coffee and threw sarcastic comments my way. Fed up, I decided to ignore her. Suddenly, she lost her temper and shouted, "How dare you ignore me? You're just a mere daughter-in-law without a job." I kept cleaning, trying to block out her harsh words. Her anger only grew, and she confronted me again, yelling, "Unemployed and uneducated people like you should leave this house." In her rage, she then threw the hot water she had prepared for her coffee at me. "It's hot. Please stop." I screamed reflexively, shocked by her sudden aggression. Thankfully, the water wasn't boiling, so I avoided serious burns, but the situation could have been disastrous. Reacting finally, she spat out venomously, "This is what I've been saying. If you're not working, leave this house." Her smirk was cold and unfeeling. Exhausted by her relentless hostility, I felt I had no choice but to comply with her demand. "All right," I said, "I'll leave." "Good," she snapped. "That makes things easier. Leave quickly." I hardly packed my belongings and decided to leave that very day. I couldn't stand another moment in such a toxic environment. I headed straight to my parents' home. When I arrived, my parents were surprised by my sudden visit, but they welcomed me warmly. I waited for a call from Daniel, but none came. No calls, no messages. Feeling isolated, I decided not to reach out until he did. A month passed since I returned to my parents' house, but still, there was no word from Daniel. My feelings for him began to fade, and I started to consider divorce. Then, one early morning, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. I glanced at the monitor and was shocked to see both Daniel and my mother-in-law standing outside. "What now?" I muttered to myself, confused by their appearance after all this time. "Yes, what can I do for you?" I asked through the intercom. My mother-in-law shouted, "I've forgiven you now. Come back home quickly." Her voice was as harsh as ever. "Forgiving me? What are you talking about?" I was puzzled. I hadn't done anything that required forgiveness from her. After expressing my confusion, I ended the intercom call, boiling with frustration at her presumptuous attitude. But they didn't leave. Instead, they started banging on the front door violently. Don't just hang up on me. Come on, let's go back, my mother-in-law yelled, her voice filled with urgency and irritation. Concerned that their loud presence might disturb the neighborhood, I reluctantly opened the door and invited them inside. After seating them on the living room sofa, I asked about the reason for their sudden and unexpected visit. It was especially strange since my mother-in-law had insisted I leave, and now she was asking me to return. The whole situation was bewildering. You're the one who told me to leave. There's no way I can go back now, I asserted firmly, my frustration visible. My mother-in-law accused me of being childish and claimed she had forgiven me, insisting that I return and stay at her house. She even went so far as to say, I'll let an unemployed and uneducated person like you come back and stay here. But I'm not the one who's unemployed, it's Daniel, I retorted, trying to clarify the situation. If I go back, you'll just take advantage of me every day. What about your son, huh? I added, trying to point out the obvious. Daniel seemed surprised by this revelation, and my mother-in-law looked confused, showing that Daniel hadn't told her about his job loss. Pushed further, Daniel finally admitted that he had been laid off from his job. Apologies and explanations followed, with Daniel trying to justify his silence by saying he relied on my income for our financial stability. My mother-in-law, shocked by the news, openly expressed her anger at Daniel for not finding a job yet. Why did you keep quiet about this? What are we going to do now? She scolded him. Daniel assured her that my income would be enough for the time being, which only led my mother-in-law to label him as worthless for not actively seeking employment. Fed up with Daniel's excuses and the whole situation, I couldn't believe they expected me to just return and act like nothing had happened. When my mother-in-law suggested I come back, I flatly refused, considering all the mistreatment I had endured. Their unexpected visit quickly turned into a heated argument, especially when the truth about my mother-in-law pouring boiling water on me came out. Daniel was horrified to learn about this incident and confronted his mother. Why did you do that? He demanded. She confessed that her actions were a result of me ignoring her. This revelation sparked a fierce argument between Daniel and his mother, forcing me to step in and suggest they take their dispute back to their own home. I pointed out how uncomfortable their loud arguing made me in someone else's house, which seemed to shift their attitude. Previously assertive and demanding, they now began pleading with me to return, promising no more harm. However, I saw right through their assurances. Daniel's promise to find a job seemed insincere, and my mother-in-law's vow to avoid causing trouble felt equally unreliable. I voiced my doubts, making it clear that their promises sounded empty and that they were likely to take advantage of me again. Their silence after my statement only confirmed my suspicions. I left them in the living room and retreated to my room to collect my thoughts. When I came back 10 minutes later, I found them still sitting in silence, their heads bowed as if reflecting on the situation. Frustrated by their quietness, I broke the silence. How long do you plan to stay quiet? It doesn't matter to me anymore, I said. Instead of verbal responses, I took decisive action. I handed Daniel a document I had prepared earlier, a pre-filled divorce form with my name signed on it. Daniel looked at the document utterly confused and taken aback. Can't you see it's a divorce form? I told Daniel. I'm done with someone who won't find a job and didn't even contact me after I went back to my parents' house. His protestations only irritated me further. It seemed like he was oblivious to how his actions were the root cause of our marital problems. Despite his pleas, I remained resolute in my decision. I was ready to move on from the turmoil and start fresh, free from the dysfunction that had overshadowed my life for too long. My decision to divorce Daniel was final, and nothing he could say would change that. Daniel, still in shock, questioned if the divorce was too harsh. I responded firmly, I don't think so. It's your fault, and directed the same sternness toward my mother-in-law, who was also responsible for the situation. Resigned, Daniel signed the divorce papers, cautioning me not to regret my decision. However, I felt a deep sense of relief, confident that the one who would regret this would not be me but Daniel. I'll submit the divorce papers, I declared. I don't want any compensation. Just go home. I finalized our separation. Although it might have seemed harsh, distancing myself was necessary to escape the ongoing harassment from my mother-in-law and the strain of Daniel's unemployment. 3 weeks later, while enjoying a quiet day at my parents' house, I received an unexpected call from my former mother-in-law. She informed me that the electricity and gas had been cut off at her house and hinted that I might have had something to do with it. I explained that since the divorce, I had stopped covering Daniel's and her living expenses. Desperate for help, she asked if I could pay just for that month. I found her request absurd since we were no longer related and I no longer lived there. I firmly declined, suggesting she ask Daniel for assistance since he had promised to find a job. Unable to accept my refusal, she pleaded for help, trying to use the ex-wife card. However, I remained resolute, ending the call and blocking her number to avoid further entanglements. Finally, I had severed ties with both my ex-mother-in-law, who had persistently harassed me, and Daniel, who had proven himself unreliable. Life in my parents' house gradually became peaceful, a stark contrast to the tumultuous times I had left behind. I began to enjoy a newfound sense of tranquility and freedom, relieved to be away from such a toxic environment. Several months after distancing myself from that turbulent chapter of my life, I found myself on a holiday, checking stock charts and enjoying the peace of my new routine. It was then that I received an unexpected message from Daniel. In it, he apologized for everything, acknowledging his past reliance on me and mentioning his recent employment at a factory. Despite his apology, I felt no desire to re-engage with that part of my life. Daniel also wrote about his mother's continued harsh behavior and expressed a wish for me to come back. However, reading his message convinced me that reconciliation was not an option. I decided to block Daniel's number, choosing to permanently close that door. 8 months after the divorce, life took a more positive turn when a friend introduced me to a new man. He was dependable and treated me with respect. Despite our age difference, we found a strong connection. While we weren't rushing into marriage, I cherished the happy moments we shared. He brought a sense of joy and stability that I had long missed, allowing me to focus on the present and leave my troubled past behind. With him, I began to truly rebuild my life, appreciating each day as it came and looking forward to what the future might hold.